After studying this module, you shall be able to know how the trade in goods and services has evolved in the past decades, analyze the share of the group of countries in the world trade, analyze the share of top economies of the world in the world commodity trade, evaluate the change in the share of the top commodities, identify how the value of trade between any two countries depends on the size of those countries and the distance between them. International trade plays significant role in the growth of a country. Globalization has opened up new opportunities for both consumers as well as for the business entities. Consumers gain by getting more variety of goods and services at a cheaper rate, as international trade leads to more competition among the traders, whereas domestic producers get a chance to expand their businesses abroad. International trade, in a very layman language, means the exchange of goods and services across the border of a country. International trade tries to fill the gap between the domestic supply and demand of a country. When we talk about international trade, we basically mean two things. One is the direction of trade and the pattern of trade. Direction of trade means who is trading with whom, and it depends on many factors like political relations, trade relations, prices, domestic or international, etc. Direction of trade of a country changes with the change in any of these factors. So, to better understand the international trade, it is good to analyze the direction of trade. Here we will study the direction of trade of the top economies of the world and try to analyze if there is any change in it. Pattern of trade, on the other hand, means the basket of goods which a country trades with the other nations. Basket of goods varies of every country, as every country has different set of resources which he or she directly or indirectly use in its production process. Some countries are abundant in one kind of resource but scarce in the other. It has been observed that the pattern of trade of the developing countries is quite different from that of the developed countries of the world. Earlier, developing countries used to export the intermediate goods and import the finished goods, whereas developed countries used to export the finished goods and import the intermediate goods. This phenomenon is changing as the developing economies are getting more globalized. To get a glimpse of the world pattern of trade in the commodities, we have analyzed the share of various commodities in the total world merchandise trade and tried to find if there is any change in their shares over a period of time. World trade. In this section, we are analyzing the trends in the world trade, that is the sum total of the world export and import in the value term, that is in US dollar, for the last 3 decades. Diagram 1 represents the world trade for the period between 1991 to 2013. We can deduce from this diagram that the world trade has risen sharply since 1991, but there is a sharp fall in the year 2009. This is basically due to the impact of the global financial crisis which occurred in 2007 and 8. It is considered as the downturn of the leading economic activities in the world. Due to this, there was a decline in the consumer's wealth and it badly affected the key businesses. So, it adversely affected the world trading system. Now, after 2009, the world trade has gained momentum and reached to its maximum since 1991 at $35,000 and $9.33 trillion in 2011. The above diagram shows how the world has grown in terms of trade in the past 3 decades, and we can clearly see that this growth is enormous. The following diagram too shows the world trade in services as the sum of the exports and imports in services. The trade in services has enormously grown from $8,43,430 million in 1980 to $92,19,370 million in 2013. There is a sharp rise in the world trade in services from the year 2002, which remained till 2008. After that, in 2009, due to the global financial crisis, there is a fall. This fall in 2009 did not affect much of the service sector, as the trade in the services again rose sharply from $69,78,570 million low in 2009 to $92,19,370 million in 2013. Share of countries in the world trade. For the fiscal year 2016, according to the World Bank, the countries can be classified on the basis of their gross national income, that is GNI, per capita, as under method used for this classification is World Bank Atlas method. First, low income countries, that is economies whose GNI per capita was $1,400 or less in 2014. Second, low middle income countries, that is the economies whose GNI per capita as between $1,045 to $4,125 in 2014. Third, upper middle income countries, that is the economies whose GNI per capita was between $4,125 to or less $12,735 in 2014. Fourth, high income countries, that is the economies whose GNI per capita was $12,735 or more in 2014. We are trying to analyze the share of these groups of countries in the world commodity trade for the period between 1991 to 2013. Diagram 3 shows the share of these group of countries in the world commodity trade. According to the above classification of the countries, the share of the high income countries in the world commodity trade has been the largest, but it has been declining since 1991. In 1991, it was 85%, and now in 2013, it has been reduced to 68.67%. The share of upper middle income countries, on the other hand, has increased from 10.59% in 1991 to 23.11% in 2013. This shows that the gap between the upper middle income countries and the high income countries are narrowing down very fast. The share of lower income countries in world commodity trade has declined to just 3.42% in 2013. On the other hand, the share of the lower middle income countries has risen to 6.61% in 2013. The shares of both lower and lower middle income countries are marginal in the world commodity trade. Diagram 4. Share of developed and developing countries in the world trade in services. The above diagram 4 shows the share of developing and developed nations in the world trade in services. The share of developed countries in the world trade in services has reduced from 72.1% in 1980 to 62.75% in 2013. Whereas the share of developing countries has raised from 12.19% to 17.28% respectively. This shows that the developing countries are slowly and steadily catching the other economies of the world in terms of trade in services. Diagram 5 shows the trade in services as a percentage of GDP for the high income, upper middle income, lower middle income and lower income economies of the world in the period 2005 to 2012. The percentage share of trade in services in GDP has reduced in the case of upper middle income and lower middle income countries, whereas it has increased in the case of high income and low income countries. In 2012, lower income countries has 17.83% of GDP as the share of trade in services. This is highest in comparison with the other group of the countries. This shows how reasonably the lower income countries are growing in terms of trade in services. World top trading countries and commodities analysis. Here we are analyzing the share of the world top economies and commodities in the world trade and try to see whether their share has changed in the past years or not. To analyze the share of the world top countries, we have taken 4 years 1991, 2001, 2011 and 2013. Top economies are selected on the basis of their share in the total world trade. Diagram 6. Share of top economies in the world commodity export. Diagram 6 shows the share of the top economies like USA, Germany, Japan and China in the total world commodity export in the year 1991, 2001, 2011 and 2013. Except China, all other top countries have faced a reduction in their share in the world export. USA share was 22% in 1991, which has been reduced to 9% in 2013. Germany's share has reduced from 21% to just 8% in 1991 and 2013 respectively. In case of Japan, it has reduced from 16.4% to 4% for the same years. China, for the past few years, has emerged as the strong exporter of the commodities and its share in the total world export has raised from just 3.2% in 2001 to 12.3% in 2013. Diagram 7. Share of top economies in the world commodity imports. The picture is almost the same in the case of share of top economies in the world import. Diagram 7 shows except China, none of the selected countries has felt an increase in the share in the world's imports. USA, Germany, Japan and UK, all the 4 countries has faced a reduction in their share in the world commodity imports as China's share has increased 3-folds from 2001 to 2013. As far as the pattern of trade is concerned, the following diagram 8 will give you an insight about the commodities traded and their share in the world trade. In diagram 8, it has been shown that the major commodity which is traded in the world is machinery and electronics, which share around 25%. But its share in the world trade has reduced from 27.34% in 1990 to 25.3% in 2010. The share of transportation goods has also reduced from 15.2% in 1990 to 10.01% in 2010. The share of commodities like fuels, plastic and rubber, stone and glasses, food products, minerals and chemicals in the world trade has increased since 1990, whereas the share of commodities like animals, hides and skins, wood, footwear, textile and clothing, machines and electronics, metals and transportation has declined. This analysis gives a view of the pattern of the world trade and how it is changing. Next is the gravity model. There is a hypothesis that the trade relation between the countries will be much stronger if they share close boundaries with each other, if they have common cultures with almost similar spoken languages, and the size of the economy also plays a significant role in it. This hypothesis can be tested with the help of a model known as gravity model. This model was first used by Jan Tinbergen in 1962. A simple gravity model predicts that the bilateral trade between two countries depend on the size of the economy and the distance between them. The size of the economy, that is GDP, matters in the trade relations because it is very much connected to the volume of the imports and exports in an economy. It is observed that the economies with large size can add more goods and services to the economy as they are more capable in production. So, they have more to contribute to the export market. These economies, on the other hand, generate more income by selling more goods and services in the world market. So, the import of these economies are also high as they have more income to spend on their imports. Table 9. Relationship between the USA trade from the top economies in terms of gross domestic product, that in year 2014. Diagram 9 gives a view about how the trade of a large economy like USA depends on the size of the other trading partners. Larger the other economy is, larger is the trade. If we observe diagram 9, we can see that the trade of USA to China is high and with other selected countries is quite low in 2014. This is because in the past few years, China has emerged as the second largest economy of the world. All the dots in diagram 9 lies in quadrant 2 and 3, which shows that the larger the trading partner in terms of size, the higher is the volume of the trade of USA with that particular partner. Apart from the size of the economy, there are other factors like distance between the countries, cultural affinity, geographical conditions, spread of MNC across the nations, existence of different or same borders, etc. Let us now formulate a simple gravity model which can be empirically tested. Suppose there are two countries I and J, then the simple gravity model is represented as under Tij is equals to F bracket Gi to the power beta 1 into Gj to the power beta 2 divided by Dij to the power beta 3 bracket close into Eij, where Tij is the value of trade between the countries I and J, Gi to the power beta 1 is the GDP of country 1, Gj to the power beta 2 is the GDP of country J, Dij to the power beta 3 is the distance between the two countries I and J, and Eij is the error term with expected value equals to 1. Now the above equation predicts that the value of trade between country I and country J is directly related to the product of the GDP of the country I and the country J, whereas inversely related to the distance between the two countries I and J. As the product of the two countries' GDP rises, the value of trade between those two countries will rise. On the other hand, if the distance between the two countries are large, the value of trade between them will decrease and vice versa. Taking the log on both the sides of the equation, we have log Tij is equals to beta naught plus beta 1 log Gi plus log Gj minus log Dij plus Eij. By regressing this model, we can face two problems. First is, this model cannot be used when the value of Tij is equals to 0 for some of the observations. And the second problem is that this kind of model with log linear form can pose a problem of biasness when we try to estimate through OLS technique. Because some of the drawbacks are attached to this model, researchers in their papers have suggested a multiplicative model which can be estimated by using Poisson pseudo maximum likelihood. Basically, this technique is used for the count data. Tij is equals to exp bracket beta naught plus beta 1 log gi plus log gj minus log dij bracket close into eij. World trade in both countries as well as in services has grown sharply since 1990, though there was a drop in trade values of both in 2008 due to the global financial crisis. After 2008, again trade in goods and services has increased. The share of the high income countries in the world commodity trade has been declining since 1990, and on the other hand, the share of the upper middle income countries has been rising steadily. This shows that the gap between the upper middle and the high income countries in terms of trade in commodities is narrowing. The share of the developed economies in the trade in services has been reducing since 1990, whereas in the case of developing countries, the picture is reverse. This indicates that the developing economies are now catching up with the developed economies in terms of trade in services. Analyzing trade in services as a percentage of GDP, it has been seen that this share has risen in case of high income and lower income countries, whereas the share of trade in services in GDP is highest in the lower income countries. Except China, all the other top economies has faced a reduction in the share in world export as well as in the imports. China in the past few years has emerged as a major world exporter, which has raised its position to become the second largest economy of the world. Machinery and electronic goods has a major share in the world trade, but their share has been declining. This is because Japan was the major exporter in the machinery and electronic goods, and now its share has reduced due to the cheap export machinery and electronic goods exported by China. The demand for fuel, mainly petroleum products, has been rising. Fuels also has a significant share in the world commodity trade, and its share is rising. According to a hypothesis, a country will trade more with those partners with whom it shares the borders, has common culture, with same geographical conditions, etc. The size of the trade partner and the distance between the two countries play a significant role in trading habits of a country. Gravity model tries to analyze the connection between how the trade of a country depends on the size and distance of the trading partners.